This is a 2008 Audi Q7 with a bit more than 500,000 kilometers. It's equipped with a 3-liter V6 diesel engine, mated to a 6-speed automatic gearbox. The underside and the suspension of this car is pretty interesting for a couple of reasons. But first, I will talk about the rust. Usually you can't find a big amount of rust on the underside of these cars, and when I mention these cars I mean this first generation Q7, the first generation VW Touareg and the first generation Porsche Cayenne, since all of these cars share the same platform, even though the Q7 has it modified a bit more. But anyway, as you can see, this Q7 is not an exception, so there is not much rust on the underside, except a couple of places. The middle section of the exhaust has some more visible rust. There is some rust around the rear prop shaft center bearing support. There is some rust around the left and right rear exhaust silencer mounting points. The rear subframe has some surface rust on it. The rear sway bar coating is disintegrating, and lastly, there is the rust on the rear wheel hub and bearing assembly on both sides. That's it. There are no holes in the body, unlike on my cheap Range Rover. The front subframe looks great with a minimal amount of surface rust, unlike on my cheap Range Rover. And the place around the top of the front air struts is also without any traces of rust, unlike on my cheap Range Rover I had. In the past I did some videos about that hilarious car as well, so check them out if you want. But let's move on. The front part of the underside looks really good until I remove the plastic cover. With the plastic cover removed you can immediately see two issues. First, there is sealant around the oil drain plug, which is not a good sign. But even worse is the clearly visible oil leak from the rear of the engine, which is most probably caused by the rear main seal. However, I will come back to these issues later, since we have to move on. The front suspension parts are currently in an acceptable condition and there are no strange sounds from the front during driving. This is because most of these parts were already replaced in the past. So the lower control arms, the drop links, the tie rods and also the upper control arms were replaced in the past. The only things here which are still original from the factory are the front air struts, which have the manufacturing year still visible on the sticker. But I have to add that the residual pressure valves on top of these air struts were already replaced in the past, but that's a common problem of these cars and it's a cheap repair. Other than this, the drive shafts have no play and the wheel bearings are also fine. But sadly, I have no information about the drive shafts and wheel bearings, if they were replaced in the past or not. The rear inner bushing on both the lower control arms has some cracks on it, but these cracks are still not that bad. The outer bushings on these lower control arms also have some cracks and wear and tear, but that's still not that catastrophic either. On the middle part of the underside you can see the gearbox, the transfer case, the two prop shafts and the DPF filter. All of these things were never even removed. The only thing which was replaced in this area is the air suspension air compressor, which is located under this plastic cover, and it was replaced in 2015. On the gearbox there is some strange oil residue, but I don't think it's the gearbox which is leaking. To me it seems like this is the engine oil residue from the rear engine oil leak. Here you can see the DPF filter, which is still in place and it's still working even after 500,000 kilometers. And according to the manufacturing date on it, it is the original DPF made in 2008. Next there is the transfer case, which is without any oil leaks and it's still the original part from 2008 as well. The front prop shaft does have some play, but there are still no loud noises from it and according to the sticker, it's still the original part from 2008. The rear prop shaft looks like it was rescued from the Titanic, and while it does have some play, there are still no loud noises from it. However, as you can see, the rubber part of the center bearing support is already worn with cracks and stuff, so sooner than later it is gonna fall apart. But this condition is absolutely not a surprise. In fact, It is a surprise that the rubber is still in one piece, since this prop shaft is also the original, never replaced part from 2008, according to the sticker on it. But let me stop for a moment, because it's good to know that these cars were available with two types of rear prop shafts. The before facelift cars have this type of a more simple prop shaft, which as you can see can survive even 500,000 kilometers. On the other side, the facelifted cars have a newer, more complex prop shaft, which is not that durable as the older type. The rear part of the underside is like traveling back in time, since all of these things you see, the control arms, the bolts, the drive shafts, the differential, all of them are still the original parts from 2008. And except some ABS speed sensor and the bolts which adjust the wheel alignment, none of this stuff was touched by anybody since 2008. Even the air struts are original, never even removed. And of course, there is some wear and tear. So the differential mounting bushing doesn't look very good, all the control arm bushings are dry and cracked to some extent, and the sway bar bushings are dry and cracked too. But none of this stuff is rattling, clunking or leaking, and none of this stuff fall apart yet.
Not great, not terrible.
For more information about this Q7, check out the complete detailed review about this particular car, or check out the used car review of this Q7, or visit my website for all the information about it in one place.